See what great love the Father has given us, that we should be called God's children, and we are. Welcome to this week's midweek devotional. Glad you're tuned in. At the time I'm filming this, it's the last day of February, and by the time you watch this, it's going to be March. And so whether you are kind of holding on for those last few weeks of winter or looking forward to warming temperatures in springtime, glad that you've chosen to join us, and hope that your week is going well. This past Sunday, we looked at the text in Luke 15, Jesus' parable of the lost son. And there are a couple important themes that we've been exploring in this series regarding these lost parables throughout chapter 15. And the first is the value of what was lost. And to our ears, and certainly to the ears of Jesus' audience at that time, the tax collectors, sinners, and Pharisees, they would have heard Jesus placing priceless value on what was lost. And the second is the emphasis on the individual who was impacted by the lost, and then their actions that followed. And this, of course, is representing the attitude and actions of God to seek and save the lost. But I want to take a little closer look at this parable of the lost son. And for me, as I grew up, this parable was often referred to as the prodigal son. And every time I had heard the word prodigal in the past, it just drummed up these ideas of somebody who has lived waywardly, has walked away from their faith or their family and whatnot. And we hear that phrase in the culture, like the prodigal son has returned home. And so we get this idea that may be what prodigal means. It's this waywardness, this person who's living waywardly. But it wasn't until I read Timothy Keller's book, The Prodigal God, that I was able to reframe my understanding of the word prodigal and its significance in this parable of the lost son. Keller points out that the word prodigal actually means, it's an adjective, and it means extravagant or generous, lavish, that sort of connotation there. And so as we think about the father being the prodigal, being the one who extends a lavish or extravagant or generous love or grace, that kind of shapes how I understand this parable a little bit differently. Think about how it now applies to the father's love for his sons, right? The son who was lost returns home, and the father's extravagant and generous love was shown to him, right? Even though he had walked away, even though, as Rick pointed out, he basically said, "I wish you were dead," when he left. And he returns home. What was lost is found. What was dead is now alive. And the father lavishes this love on this son. He gives him the ring, the robe, this extravagant party with the fattened calf and everything to celebrate the return. And then there's the older brother. He is disapproving of the father's extravagant display of love towards the younger brother. He maybe even sees this prodigal love as being wasteful or reckless, right? He doesn't quite see this love in the same way. But the father's love towards the older son doesn't change. And we see that as the father says to his older son, "Everything I have is yours," right? And so what a picture, a beautiful picture of God's grace poured out to us, not because of anything we've done to earn it, but because of our value to God and because God loves us. So how do we respond to God's prodigal grace, right? God's prodigal love? For me, the only meaningful response is faith in Jesus. And Paul writes in Ephesians 2 that for you are saved by grace through faith, and it is not of yourselves. It is God's gift, not from works, so that no one can boast. And so in that grace, I can say today, like John in 1 John 3, he says, "See what great love the Father has given us that we should be called God's children, and we are. God bless. Have a great week.